What happens when the most dangerous man in Dubai slides a diamond necklace across a table, and the woman who picks it up already owns the company that made it? Cole Yu built his empire on one principle. Everything and everyone has a price. He had never been wrong. He was also never wrong about being in control, of a room, of a deal, of a woman. Bryn Easton let him believe all three. This is a story about power. Who has it? Who pretends to have it? And the terrifying moment you realize the difference. It's about the kind of chemistry that skips past attraction and goes straight to danger. It's about two people who are so perfectly matched in every way that the only real question was never if they would fall. It was who would fall first. One of them thought they already knew the answer. They were wrong. If you want to see how this story ends, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single chapter. And before we start, drop a comment. Whose side are you on right now? Cole, for being bold? Or Bryn, for already being 3 steps ahead? The bar on the 54th floor of the Burj Al Arab did not advertise itself. It didn't need to. The people who knew about it were exactly the people it wanted, and everyone else was simply not invited. The lighting was the color of old amber, warm and slightly conspiratorial, and the windows offered Dubai the way God might have, had God been particularly fond of excess. The sea on one side, the city's lit spine on the other, and between them a horizon so clean it looked invented. Cole Yu noticed her before he had a reason to. That was unusual. Cole was a man of reasons. He did not act on impulse. He acted on calculation that moved so fast it felt like impulse. He had trained himself out of instinct years ago, somewhere between his 28th birthday and his first $1 billion, and he had not missed it. Instinct was for people who couldn't afford to be wrong. But there she was, alone at the far end of the bar, a glass of something dark and still in front of her, her posture not quite relaxed and not quite formal, occupying that particular frequency that people reach when they are entirely comfortable in their own company. She was not performing solitude. She was simply in it. He watched her for 4 minutes before he moved. He would later be unable to explain those 4 minutes, which bothered him more than he let on. He sat down 1 seat away, not beside her, which would have been presumptuous, and not 2 seats away, which would have been cowardly. He ordered his drink and let the silence sit between them for a moment. She did not look at him. She did not pointedly not look at him either, which was rarer than he expected. Most people, when they were aware of Cole Yu, performed some version of awareness. She just sat with her drink as if the whole bar existed at a comfortable distance from her. "You're not going to tell me this seat is taken?" "No." Most people find a reason to move the conversation along faster than that. Most people are nervous. He looked at her then, properly. "And you're not?" She turned just enough to return the look. "Not particularly, no." Her name, she told him. Eventually, after another drink, after a conversation that ranged from Dubai's architectural overcorrection to the specific loneliness of living in cities that never sleep, was Bryn, just Bryn, offered the way people offer a name when the last name is either irrelevant or deliberate. Cole had a nose for deliberate things. She was in Dubai on business, she said, which in this city was like saying she was breathing. Everyone was in Dubai on business. He pressed gently, the kind of gentle that had an iron frame, and she deflected with an ease that was either practiced or natural. He couldn't tell. He was charmed and unsettled in equal measure, and the combination produced in him something very close to recklessness. "And I have something I'd like to show you," he said, near the end of the second drink. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a velvet pouch on the bar between them, then pulled the cord loose and let the necklace slide out onto the marble surface. It was extraordinary. Pavé diamonds set in platinum, the kind of piece that existed at the intersection of jewelry and architecture. He had bought it 2 days ago from a private jeweler in the Gold Souk, not because he had someone in mind for it, but because it was the most beautiful object he had seen in recent memory, and Cole Yu did not deny himself beautiful objects. "Use only this," he said. A beat. She looked at the necklace. She looked at him. You mean wear only this? I mean what I said. The necklace was extraordinary, but that was not, Cole would later understand, why he had shown it to her. He had shown it to her because in the 4 minutes he had spent watching her from across the bar, he had identified her as someone who would not be dazzled by it, someone who would pick it up the way she picked up everything, which was with assessment rather than wonder, and he had wanted to see that. He had wanted to see something handled beautifully. She did not disappoint. She turned it over in her hands, studied the clasp, tilted it toward the light the way a jeweler might. Then she looked at him. You carry this around. I bought it this week. For someone specific. Not until tonight. She looked at him for a moment that lasted long enough to be intentional. That is either very smooth or very true. Both things can be true. She set it down. Then she picked it up again. Tell me why you said use only this, not wear. He thought about it. He had not thought about it in advance. The words had arrived on their own. The way things do when you stop managing and start existing. Because when wear implies decoration. I didn't mean decoration. What did you mean? I meant permission. She looked at him. He looked at her. The bar hummed. Permission for what? For whatever the rest of tonight is. She picked up the necklace and held it for a moment, not dramatically, not with calculation, but with the particular quality of genuine consideration, which he recognized and respected. Then she said, All right. That night, in the suite on the 61st floor, the city spread below them like a map of ambition, the necklace catching light from a dozen different angles. Cole Yu felt something he did not have a word for. The closest he could get, in the weeks that followed, was this. He felt matched. Not met. He had met people before. Plenty of them. Matched. The specific sensation of having finally encountered a resistance equal to his force. It was intoxicating and slightly alarming, and he pushed both feelings down and called what was left desire, which was simpler. He fell asleep eventually, which was not something he did easily in the presence of other people. When he woke up, she was gone. The necklace was on the pillow beside him. Cole Yu did not chase people. This was a principle as fundamental to him as compound interest or the value of leverage. People moved toward Cole. Cole did not move toward people. The architecture of his life had been built around this gravity, everything and everyone orbiting, none of it requiring him to pursue. He spent 6 days not chasing Bryn. On the 7th day, he found out she was still in Dubai. He had not found this out through any elaborate investigation. He had simply heard her name in a conversation at a dinner he attended, mentioned in passing by someone who did not know he was listening, in the context of a lunch at Zuma the following Tuesday. It was the kind of coincidence that Cole did not believe in, which made him trust it even less. He went to Zuma on Tuesday. She was already seated when he arrived, across from a woman in her 50s, whose posture radiated the particular authority of someone who had spent decades being the smartest person in every room she entered. They were deep in conversation, and for a moment, Cole stood at the entrance to the restaurant and watched Bryn with fresh eyes. Not the amber-lit bar eyes, not the 61st floor eyes, but the broad daylight, reading a person eyes. She was sharp. That was the word that assembled itself as he watched. Not just intelligent, sharp. The way she leaned forward when she made a point. The way her hands moved when she was working through an argument. The way the older woman listened to her, which was the listening of a peer, not an audience. He had the maitre d' send a drink to her table, old-fashioned. He had memorized her order. She looked up when it arrived, and her eyes found him across the restaurant with zero difficulty, as if she had always known where he was standing. She raised the glass exactly 1 inch. Then she turned back to her conversation. He stood there for another 5 seconds before he understood that this was his invitation. An inch of glass. Take it or don't. He took it. He walked over, exchanged introductions. The older woman's name was Margaret Osei, and she gave him the careful assessment of someone who knew exactly who he was and had formed opinions. and the three of them talked for 40 minutes before Margaret excused herself with a warmth that felt slightly deliberate. Alone, Bryn looked at him over the rim of her drink. "You came here for me." "I come to Zuma regularly." "Cole. You came here for me." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yes." Something shifted in her expression. Not softening, exactly. More like a recalibration. "Okay. Then ask what you actually want to ask." "Why did you leave?" "Because I wanted to." "And the necklace? It wasn't mine to keep. I gave it to you." "No." She set down her glass. "You showed it to me. Those are different things. You'll understand the difference eventually." He didn't understand the difference. He thought about it for the rest of the afternoon and most of the evening, and the not understanding of it pulled at something in him, the way an unanswered question does when you have built your entire self around having answers. They had dinner that night. Not at Zuma. At a place she chose. A rooftop restaurant in the Alquoz district. Intimate and unhurried. Nothing like the restaurants Cole usually favored. He noticed how comfortable she was choosing. Not performatively decisive. Not the studied deliberateness of someone trying to demonstrate independence. She simply knew what she wanted and moved toward it. And there was something in watching that, something in being on the receiving end of it, that he filed away without examining too closely. The weeks that followed had a shape he could not quite name. They were not dating, exactly. They were not having an affair, exactly. What they were doing was something with fewer walls than either of those things and considerably more electricity. She came and went on her own schedule. She appeared in his life at angles he did not anticipate, not because she was trying to catch him off guard, he sensed, but because her schedule was genuinely her own and did not organize itself around his. That was new. That was, in a way he would not admit out loud, slightly unnerving. The chemistry between them was the kind that does not improve with management. Cole had, in previous relationships, found ways to keep a certain controlled distance. Emotional ledger entries. Exits calculated in advance. He found none of those mechanisms worked with Bryn. She was not interested in his distance. She was not intimidated by his edges. And she had, somehow, a quality he could only describe as unscarceable. She could not be made to feel small, and she could not be made to need him. And these two things together were more attractive to him than anything in his considerable experience. There was a Tuesday in the 5th week that he would return to afterward, a quiet Tuesday, one without events or meetings of consequence, when they had spent 6 hours in her apartment doing nothing in particular. She had been working at the kitchen table, laptop open, reading something dense, making notes in the margins of a printed document with a red pen in a handwriting he couldn't read from where he sat. He had been on the sofa with his own calls and correspondence, and at some point the working had simply stopped and the talking had started, the way it did with her, without announcement or transition. They had talked about failure. She had asked him, directly, with that specific quality of directness that did not feel like an interview but like an invitation, about the first time he had lost something he had worked for. Not a deal, not money. The first time he had given something everything, and watched it not be enough. He had not answered that question for a long time. He kept 3 layers of deflection ready for questions like that, and had deployed all 3 by the time he noticed what he was doing. She had just waited. He had told her, eventually, about his first company, not U Holdings, which was the story people knew, but the company before that, the one he had built at 24 from an idea and an amount of money he would now spend on a single dinner, and which had failed at 26 with enough force to take his confidence with it for the better part of 2 years. He told her about the specific shame of it, not the failure itself, which he could narratize by now, but the shame of the people who had believed in him and the conversations he had avoided for months because he did not know how to be Cole Yu without being successful. She had listened without softening her face into sympathy, which he appreciated. When he finished, she said, "What did you do with the 2 years?" "Built something better." Before that, he had thought about it. Learned that I had been building the company for the version of myself that other people were expecting, not for me. And you Holdings is for you. Yes. She had looked at him for a moment. That's the most important thing you've told me. He had not known what to do with that, so he had said nothing, which with her was always an acceptable answer. She had gone back to her papers. He had sat on the sofa and felt stripped in a specific way. Not vulnerable in the way he feared, the kind that made you small. Stripped the way wood is stripped before it's refinished, lighter and more honest than it was before. He was not building a story with her. He was just being inside one. He had not done that in years, and the strangeness of it was wearing off, and in its place was something that felt uncomfortably close to relief. "What do you do?" he asked her one evening, 3 weeks in, sitting on the terrace of her apartment in downtown Dubai. She had an apartment in downtown Dubai. This had surprised him. Most of the people in his world stayed in hotels. She had a lease, and plants, and a shelf of books with cracked spines. Consulting. She did not look up from what she was reading. For whom? Various clients. What sector? Multiple. He watched her for a moment. You know what I do. I do. You researched me. Didn't have to. You're in the news often enough. And I don't know nearly as much about you. She finally looked up, and the look she gave him was one of those that he had started cataloging. The kind where her face contained several things at once, and he could only read one of them. Does that bother you? He wanted to say no. He didn't, because he was not going to lie to her, which was a rule he had made with himself without quite realizing when. A little. Good. She turned the page. Sit with that. He sat with it. He was not good at sitting with things. He sat with it anyway. What he did not do, and this is the part he would later circle back to with the particular pain of a man who prides himself on precision, was ask directly. He did not say, "Who are you, really?" He did not say, "Give me your full name, your company name, your history." He assumed the shape of her from what he could see. He built his picture from the apartment and the books, and the way Margaret O.C. listened to her, and the way she chose restaurants and the particular quality of her confidence. He built a picture that was mostly right and critically wrong, and he did not notice the critical wrong parts because he was not looking for them. He was too busy falling. Cole Yu, who had not fallen for anything in the better part of a decade, who had made a virtue of his own imperviousness, was falling quietly, quickly, and with the specific helplessness of a man who does not see the ground coming because he has never fallen before. And Bryn Easton, CEO of the Easton Group, whose legal team had been engaged in quiet preliminary discussions about an acquisition of U Holdings, Asia-Pacific division, for the better part of 4 months, watched him fall with something that had started as calculation and was now, to her considerable alarm, becoming something else entirely. There is a specific kind of loneliness that belongs to powerful women. It is not the loneliness of isolation. Bryn had never been isolated. She had always had people around her, good people, people who cared. It is the loneliness of being seen as the role before you are seen as the person. The CEO first, the decision-maker first, the balance sheet, the strategy, the risk assessment, all of these first, and then, somewhere beneath the function, the woman. If anyone bothered to look that far, most people didn't. She had made her peace with this. It was one of those arrangements you make with your life when the alternative costs too much. You give up the expectation of being known, and in return you gain the freedom of not having to manage anyone else's perception of you. It was a reasonable trade. She had honored it for years. Cole Yu had not honored it. Not because he was better than the arrangement. In the beginning, he had operated exactly within it, seeing the surface and calling it the whole. But somewhere in the weeks of Tuesday, silences and beach conversations, and the specific intimacy of watching each other work in the same room without speaking, he had started looking further, and the looking had not been strategic. That was the thing she kept returning to. It had not been strategic. He had no use for her vulnerability. He had no leverage to gain from her grief about her father or her honesty about the year she had almost lost everything. He had simply wanted to know. The way people want to know things when they are genuinely present rather than performing presence. She was not used to being genuinely present with anyone. Her close circle was small. Margaret, who had been her father's advisor, and was now something between mentor and mirror. Her CFO, James, who had been with her through the restructuring and knew her professional mind better than anyone. Her college friend, Denise, who had the great gift of treating Bryn's success as completely unremarkable, which was the most nourishing thing any friend could do. These were the people she trusted. The people who had earned the trust through time and consistency, and the willingness to tell her hard things. Cole had earned nothing yet. He had been present for 3 months. He was, by any rational measure, too new for the kind of access she had given him. She knew this. She had given it anyway. The thing about the necklace? The thing she had not said on the beach, and had not said in the apartment, and had turned over in her mind with the specific thoroughness she applied to things she did not yet understand, was that she had known what it meant when she picked it up. Not what he thought it meant, what it actually meant. He had said permission. He had meant it as an invitation wrapped in confidence, the kind of move that a man like Cole Yu makes when he is used to setting the terms. And she had understood all of that, and she had picked it up anyway, because she had looked at him across that bar for the 4 minutes he spent watching her. And she had seen something that she had not expected. A person who was slightly lost inside his own architecture. A man who had built something so exact and so defended that he had, somewhere along the way, forgotten which parts he had built for protection and which parts he actually was. She recognized this because she had done a version of it herself. The company as shield. The capability as identity. The relentless forward motion as a way of not standing still long enough to feel the things you had not finished feeling. She had picked up the necklace because she was curious about what happened when someone like that was given something real to hold. What she had not accounted for was what happened to her. She was sitting on the terrace the morning after she had told him about her father, drinking her first coffee of the day, watching Dubai wake up in layers, the construction cranes first, then the highways, then the glass towers catching light, then the slower residential streets. And she was thinking, I am happy. Not contentedly happy, not the managed satisfaction of progress, but the disorganized, full-bodied kind that sits in the chest and does not behave. She noted this the way she noted things, clearly, without drama, with the intention of understanding it. What she understood, sitting there with her coffee in the early light, was that she had not been happy like this since before her father died. She had been functional and purposeful and satisfied and occasionally joyful, but not this. Not this particular feeling of being entirely where she was, entirely in her own life, entirely present to something that was worth being present to. She also understood, with the clarity that morning light sometimes delivers whether you want it or not, that this meant the stakes were now real. It meant that whatever was happening with Cole Yu was no longer an interesting complication in an otherwise clean situation. It was the situation, and that when the Forbes cover arrived, when he found out, as he would, because he always would, the conversation that followed would not just be about business. It would be about whether she was worth the trust she had not fully given him. She finished her coffee. She sent a message to her legal team, asking them to hold the preliminary discussions at their current stage until further notice. Not close them, hold them. She was not going to destroy months of careful work because of feelings she could not yet name. But she was going to give herself a little more time to know what she was building before she decided what to build next to it. Then she went inside and got dressed and went to meet Cole for breakfast at a place she had chosen, at a time she had chosen on her terms, as it had always been, as she intended it to remain. The event was called the Gulf Business Summit, and Cole had organized it, which meant it took place at the Atlantis The Palm, which meant it was attended by approximately 400 people, who had between them enough net worth to purchase a small country, and the restraint not to say so. Cole had been moving through the reception for 40 minutes, doing what he did at these events, which was less networking and more governance, the maintenance of the ecosystem his business required, when he saw Ryu Hyun-woo. Ryu was 62, built like a man who had taken up rowing in his 50s and refused to stop, and he was one of Cole's oldest rivals turned uneasy allies. He was also, Cole noticed, holding something. A magazine. A business magazine, folded back to a particular page, which he was showing to the man beside him with the particular animation of someone delivering news they find satisfying. Cole would not ordinarily have registered a magazine at a cocktail reception. But he saw the header, Forbes Middle East, and beneath it, the saturated gloss of a cover image, and even from across the room, something in his peripheral cognition fired a warning. He walked over. Cole. Ryu's smile carried the warmth of a man who has something you don't. You know this woman. He handed over the magazine, the cover. The issue was 3 weeks old. He simply hadn't been reading business magazines. He'd been otherwise occupied. The headline read, "The Quiet Giant, B. Easton and the Empire She Built in Plain Sight." Cole looked at the photograph for a long time. It was a formal portrait. She was wearing a dark-structured blazer, her posture one he recognized, the look in her eyes one he recognized, and across the bottom of the cover the caption, "Bryn Easton, CEO, Easton Group. Global revenues, 4.2 BN. The floor did not actually move. It only felt like it did. Apparently she's been in Dubai for 2 months, Ryu was saying, still with that smile. Rumor is the Easton Group is positioning for a major acquisition in this region. Nobody knows the target yet. He tilted his head. Do you know her? Cole handed the magazine back. His voice was level because he had spent 34 years building a voice that was level when everything else was not. We've met. He excused himself. He found a corner of the room, genuinely, one of the few actual corners in the Atlantis ballroom, a geometric mercy, and stood in it and thought. This was what he did when something hit him. He stood still and processed, because motion before processing had cost him too many times. 4.2 billion, the Easton Group, 2 months in Dubai, acquisition in the region. Ryu did not know the target. Cole did. His own Asia-Pacific division had been under strategic review for 6 months, a review he had kept quiet, because the decision of whether to divest or restructure was one he had not yet made. But the preliminary signals were in the market for anyone looking carefully enough. And Bryn Easton, it turned out, looked carefully at everything. He stood in that corner for 7 minutes. Then he called her. She answered on the second ring. I just saw the Forbes cover. A pause. Not the pause of someone caught off guard, but the pause of someone placing a moment in context. Okay. I need to see you. I know you do. Tonight. Another pause. Shorter. I'll send you the address. He drove to the apartment in downtown Dubai. He had been there a dozen times. He knocked instead of using the key she had given him 3 weeks ago, which felt correct in a way he couldn't explain, like a recalibration of terms, a return to a state where he needed permission. She opened the door and looked at him without speaking, which is a specific kind of courage. He walked in. She poured water for both of them and set the glasses on the counter, and then turned and leaned against the counter and waited. She had always been good at waiting. He had attributed it to patience. He now understood it differently. It was not patience, but a kind of absolute composure. The composure of someone who had decided long ago that she would not be the first to flinch. You were looking at my company, he said. The entire time, the whole 2 months. My legal team has been in preliminary talks about the Asia-Pacific division. Yes. And you walked into that bar knowing who I was. She was quiet for a moment. Yes. He absorbed that. It hit differently than he expected. Not just the sharp edge of betrayal, but beneath it, something worse. Something that felt like grief. Then what was this? What were we? She unfolded her arms. When she spoke, her voice was careful in the way of someone choosing words not to protect themselves, but to be accurate. When I walked into that bar, I knew who you were. I sat down because I was curious. I let the conversation happen because I wanted to. I went upstairs with you because I wanted to. Nothing after that first night had anything to do with the acquisition. You should have told me. You never asked." She held his gaze, not defiantly, steadily. "Cole, you never asked. You assumed everything about me. You decided what I was and what I was doing here and what I was capable of, and you fit me into that shape. And you never once asked the question that would have changed the answer." He wanted to argue this. He found he couldn't. The question being my full name. The question being, "Who are you?" The silence that followed lasted long enough to change shape. It started as anger, his, hot and disorganized, which he wasn't used to. It became something quieter, which was worse, because quiet anger at least had somewhere to go. "I need time," he said. "Take it." He did. He walked out of the apartment and he drove for an hour along the coastline with no destination, which was as close to aimless as Cole Yu got. And he tried to assemble what he actually felt, rather than what was most convenient to feel. What he felt, under everything, under the anger and the injury and the humiliation of not having asked, was afraid. He had given someone something real. He had let himself fall for the first time in years, and it had happened with someone who was already, professionally, in a position of tremendous power over him. And she had not used it. That was the thing his mind kept returning to. She had not used it. 4 months of access. 2 months of whatever they were to each other. She had not used it. He drove for an hour. Then he drove back to his own building and rode the elevator to his penthouse and sat in the dark for a long time. And the thing he was afraid of gradually resolved into something he could name. He was afraid she would leave. Not because of the acquisition. That could be managed. That was just business. He was afraid she would decide he was not worth the complexity. He was afraid she would decide, with the same clean composure she applied to everything, that the game wasn't worth playing anymore. For the first time in a long time, Cole Yu could not engineer his way out of a feeling. He did not contact her for 4 days. She did not contact him. This was the right thing. She knew it was the right thing. Cole needed space the way a burn needs air, and pushing through it before he was ready would accomplish nothing. She had waited out harder things than 4 days of silence, but that didn't make the waiting easy. She had known, going in, what she was doing. She had told herself it was clean. The business strand and the personal strand were separate cables, and as long as she held them apart, no current would cross. She had believed this. She now admitted to herself in the early hours of the third night, wrong. At 31, Bryn Easton had built a company that her father had started, carried it through his death when she was 26, restructured it at 28 in the middle of a market correction that had destroyed better-funded competitors, and expanded it at 30 into 3 new markets simultaneously. She had done all of this without losing herself, without becoming the machine that the industry kept inviting her to become. She knew who she was. She knew what she wanted. She was not, generally, uncertain. Cole Yu had made her uncertain. Not about the business. She had always been clear about that. And the acquisition discussions were proceeding through proper channels regardless of anything personal. About herself. About what she had let happen. She had told herself she was in control. And she had been. And then somewhere in the 3rd or 4th week of alfresco dinners and late-night conversations about things neither of them discussed with other people, she had stopped counting herself as controlling anything and started simply living inside whatever it was they were building. And that was the specific loss of altitude she had not anticipated. She realized on the 4th night, not afraid of losing the acquisition. She was afraid of losing him. She thought about the version of herself she had been when she walked into that bar 3 months ago. That version had been clear-eyed and controlled, had known the business landscape and the risk calculus, and had held both cleanly. She had been, in the language she used to assess her own decisions, well-positioned. She was no longer well-positioned. She acknowledged without judgment, in the middle of something she had not fully budgeted for. The thing was, she did not regret it. She had spent 5 years since her father's death running with perfect form, not coldly, not without love or connection, but with a discipline of self that had been necessary for survival, and then, having survived, had become habit. She had not let things be large. She had processed them down to manageable size, handled them efficiently, moved on. It was a kind of triage that worked excellently for building a company and rather poorly for building anything else. Cole Yu had gotten large before she noticed. He had slipped past the triage somehow, taken up residence in a part of herself that she thought she had been careful to keep unpopulated. And now here she was on the 4th day of silence, sitting in her father's leather chair, the one she had kept, the one piece of furniture from his office that she had refused to leave in London, and feeling things with a lack of management that she did not entirely recognize. She pulled out a notebook. She wrote, "What I know." The list was short and honest. She knew he was brilliant and impulsive and kind in ways he didn't advertise. She knew he was lonelier than his empire suggested. She knew that whatever had happened between them was real on both sides, and that the realness was not undone by the complication of the business, only made more complicated. She knew she was not going to walk away. She was not built for walking away from things that mattered, and Cole Yu had, somewhere in the course of 3 months, started to matter in a category she was still finding the words for. She closed the notebook. She looked at the chair she was sitting in. Her father had sat in this chair for 20 years, making decisions that shaped the company and reading papers with his morning coffee. And, near the end, when he was more tired than he let on, sometimes just sitting quietly in the evenings with the city outside and something on the radio that was old enough to be comfortable. She thought about what he would have said about Cole. She thought about it seriously, not as a comfort exercise, but as an actual assessment. He would have said, "Ask him the hard questions, and see if he stays when you do." She had asked him several hard questions. He had stayed for all of them. That, she thought, was data. On the 5th day, she received a call from her legal team. The preliminary discussions had reached the point where Yu Holdings needed to formally acknowledge or decline. Either Cole engaged his own team in response, or the talks were closed. She told them to hold for 72 hours. That evening, Cole called. "I want to see you." "I know. Not to argue. I know that too." They met at the beach. Not a beach club or a resort beach, but the stretch of public shore near her neighborhood, which she had discovered in the first weeks of her lease, and which she came to when she needed to think. He was already there when she arrived, which meant he had looked up where she lived more carefully than she thought. Or more likely he had simply arrived early and waited. He was facing the water. She stood beside him, and they both looked at the gulf for a while, which had the quality of a conversation without words, if you knew how to have those. "I'm not angry anymore," he said. "I know. I'm trying to figure out what I am." She turned to look at him. "That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me." He let out a breath. "I've been thinking about what you said, that I never asked." "It wasn't an accusation." "I know. That's what's been getting to me." He turned then, and the look on his face was one she had not seen before. Something stripped back, something without the usual architecture of control layered over it. "I have spent my whole adult life in rooms full of people who want things from me. And I have survived all of it by being faster than them, by reading them before they read me, by making sure I always knew more than I showed. And you walked into that bar and I let it go. I let all of it go. And I didn't even notice." The water moved. The city made its distant noise. "I should have told you," she said. "Not the company. You're right that you didn't ask. But the size of it. I should have given you that. I told myself it wasn't relevant, and I think I believe that, but I also think I was protecting something. I didn't want you to look at me the way people look at me when they know. How do they look at you? Like a balance sheet, like a threat, like a target." He was quiet for a long moment. "I would have done all three. Yes. Probably. And instead I fell in love with you like an idiot. And now I'm standing on a public beach at 9 o'clock at night, being honest in ways I'm not built for." The word landed in her chest with a weight she did not expect, even though she had suspected. Even though she had felt the corresponding thing in herself and catalogued it and held it at careful distance. Cole. Don't. I'm not going to say something dismissive. Then say whatever you're going to say. She looked at him for a moment. This man who had walked through his whole life like an empire with legs, who had just said the word love on a public beach with the same tone people use for confessions they can't afford to take back. I'm not going anywhere, she said, but we need to do this right. The business has to go through proper channels, completely separate from whatever this is. And whatever this is, it has to be real. Not your version of it and my version of it running in parallel. The same version. What does that look like? It looks like you asking me things, and me answering, and the same the other way around. He turned back to the water. She could see him processing, that particular stillness he had, the one she had learned to read as thought in motion. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll start. He turned back to her. Tell me about your father. She blinked. Of all the questions, why him? Because you built the company he started, and I want to understand why. So she told him. Standing on the beach, then sitting on the beach, then walking slowly back along the shore as the city lit itself up behind them. She told him about Robert Easton, who had founded the Easton Group as a boutique investment firm in 2001, and had spent 20 years building it with patience and precision, and the particular genius of someone who sees value before the market does. She told him about his death. A stroke, sudden, in the early morning of a Tuesday in the third week of December 5 years ago, when she was 26 and 3 years into working under him and 2 years away from the role he had been preparing her for. She told him about the year that followed, the board members who were kind and the ones who weren't, the investors who pulled out and the ones who stayed, the restructuring she had done at 28 with the help of 3 people she trusted completely, and about $900,000 of personally guaranteed debt. She told him about the moment at 30 when the company broke $4 billion in global revenues, and she had gone home and sat in her kitchen and cried for an hour, and then ordered takeout, and watched bad television, because she could not think of a better way to celebrate something that had cost so much. Cole listened. He did not perform listening. He was actually fully in it, in the way of someone who has decided to be a student of a particular subject. When she finished, he said, he would have been proud of you. Simple. Direct. No ornamentation. She appreciated that. The absence of ornamentation. She had had enough elaborate condolences over the years to know the difference. He was proud of me when he was alive, she said. I try to keep that as the tense. Was. It still holds. Cole nodded. Then, my turn. She looked at him. Ask me something. Anything. Whatever you've been not asking. She thought about it for a moment. Then, why do you live in Dubai? Business. That's not the real answer. A pause. No, it's not. He looked out at the water. I live here because my family is in Seoul, and in Seoul I am the version of myself that they need me to be. Here I can be. Less managed, less required. That's the loneliest thing I've heard all week. It works, does it? Another pause. Less than it used to. They walked back to her apartment building in a silence that had changed temperature entirely. Warmer, less careful. At the door, he did not try to come up. She thought about the deliberateness of that, and found it more moving than if he had. The acquisition, she said. My legal team needs an answer in 72 hours. I know. It stays separate. It stays separate. Your CFO will hate me. For the first time in days, he smiled. Small, slightly wry, entirely real. My CFO has been telling me to divest the Asia-Pacific division for 2 years. He'll want to send you flowers. She laughed. It surprised her. The laugh, quick and genuine, breaking through the residue of the last 5 days. He looked at her when she laughed, and whatever was in his face when he did that was something she let herself see without deflecting for the first time. "Good night, Cole." "Good night, Bryn." She went upstairs. She stood at her window and looked at the city and let herself feel what she felt, which was large and complicated. And underneath all the complication, something remarkably like peace. The launch of the Easton Group's Middle East office was held 6 weeks later at a venue on the waterfront in Dubai Marina, a glass and steel space that Bryn had chosen for its proportions, which were human-scaled rather than monumental. She had strong opinions about the difference between spaces that inspired confidence and spaces that performed it, and she did not want the launch of something she'd spent months building to feel like a performance. It was full. Investors, partners, regional executives, a handful of journalists, and the kind of faces that appear at events like this because they appear at all events like this. Margaret Osei was there, seated near the front. Several members of Bryn's core team, flown in from the London and New York offices, were in the back row with the barely suppressed expressions of people who had worked very hard for something and were now watching it begin to exist in the world. Bryn was mid-conversation near the entrance, the kind of conversation that is doing 3 things at once, professionally speaking, when she heard the energy in the room shift. She did not look up right away. She finished her sentence, made her point, smiled at the person she was speaking to. Then she looked up. Cole Yu was standing at the entrance to the room. He had not been invited. This was not an oversight. He was dressed the way he always was, with the quiet authority of someone who does not need a room's permission. But there was something different in how he stood. Something she had not seen before, which was a kind of deliberate exposure. He was not positioned, she realized. He was simply present, without the usual buffer of composure between himself and the room. Several people near him were watching with curiosity. The CEO of Yu Holdings at the Easton Group launch was not a subtle event. He made eye contact with her across the room, and she held it, and she thought, he is here on purpose, and he has not told me what he's going to do, and I am not certain whether to be alarmed or moved. The event host, misreading the room with the particular skill of event hosts everywhere, said into the microphone, "I think we have a late addition. Cole Yu, everyone." Polite applause. A few knowing looks. The room's attention now definitively on Cole, which she suspected he had anticipated. He took the microphone. She did not move. "I won't take long," he said. His voice carried the room without effort. It always did. "I'm here because I owe someone in this room a public acknowledgement, and I decided it was better to do it now than later." A different kind of quiet fell over the space. Not the polite quiet of an audience, the acute quiet of people who can tell when something real is happening. "Bryn Easton," he said, and his eyes found her across the room and stayed there, "is the most formidable person I have met in my professional life. She built this company from the ground up, in the middle of grief, against conditions that would have stopped most people, and she did it on her own terms and without asking anyone's permission." Bryn stood very still. I also made several assumptions about her that were wrong. I assumed I understood who she was before I bothered to ask. I assumed that because I was used to being the most powerful person in a room, that was still true when she was in it. I was wrong on both counts, and I was too slow to say so. The room had gone very quiet. I'm saying so now. He lowered the microphone slightly, not much, but enough to change register, to move from address to something more intimate even in front of 400 people. "I'm not going to embarrass you in your own house, but I wanted you to know, and I wanted to say it out loud, because I have spent too much of my life keeping the things that matter in private where they're safer and smaller." He set the microphone back in its stand. The silence lasted approximately 10 seconds, which is a very long time for a room full of business people. Then Margaret Osei started to applaud, and then the room followed. And Cole stood in the applause with his hands at his sides and his eyes still on Bryn across the room, and there was nothing in his face that looked like performance. Bryn looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to the person beside her and excused herself. And she walked through the room, through the curious eyes and the charged air. And she reached Cole, and she said, quietly enough that only he could hear, "Come outside." He followed her. Outside, on the waterfront terrace, the city at night was its full, absurd, magnificent self. The lights on the water, the towers, the density of ambition and capital rendered in glass and steel. She stood with her back to it and looked at him. "That was a lot," she said. "I know. You could have told me privately." "I know. I chose not to." "Why?" He thought about it for a moment. Then, "Because the problem wasn't just between you and me. The problem was who I was in every room I've been in. The version of myself that decides the story before hearing it. I needed to say it in front of witnesses." She watched him. "You understand that doesn't fix everything. I'm not trying to fix everything. I'm trying to start from the right place. Which is, you, as you are, not as I decided you were." The water moved. Somewhere behind her, through the glass walls of the venue, she could hear the event continuing. Voices, the clink of glasses, the ordinary business of a room carrying on. "I have some conditions," she said. "I assumed you would. The acquisition moves forward through clean channels. You speak to the board, your team speaks to mine, nothing crosses over to us. Whatever happens between them happens on its merits. Agreed. We move at my pace, not yours." A pause. "That's going to be difficult for me." "I know. Agreed. And you ask about everything, not just the things that occur to you, the things you would normally decide you already know." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had that particular stripped-down quality she had first heard on a beach 6 weeks ago. "That one is the hardest. I know that too." "Agreed." She looked at him. There was a version of this moment that she could imagine playing out with cool control. The terms laid out, the handshake, the return to the room to handle her event. She had run through that version in her head 100 times in the weeks since the beach. This was not that version. This was the version where the city glittered behind her, and Cole Yu stood in front of her with his hands at his sides, and nothing between himself and the world. And she stepped forward, and she kissed him. Not tentatively, not as a concession, but as a declaration, with the full measure of what she felt and no portion of it held back. He stood very still for one beat. Then his hands came up, and he held her the way you hold something you came very close to losing, and the city blazed on in its indifferent, spectacular way. When she stepped back, she looked at him. "Those were my conditions. That was my answer to yours." He almost smiled. "I didn't say anything. You were about to. I love you. I know." She straightened the lapel of his jacket with one hand, a gesture that was both practical and entirely deliberate. "I love you too. Now come back inside. This is my event." He laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of him, the kind that changes a face. She had heard it exactly twice before, and she had intended to hear it considerably more. They went back inside. Margaret Osei, seated near the front with the expression of a woman who had just had a theory confirmed, raised her glass as Bryn passed. Bryn gave her a small nod that contained approximately 7 different things, none of which required words. The event continued. The speeches were made, the partnerships announced, the champagne opened. The Easton Group's Middle East office officially existed in the world. Cole stood near the back, not trying to own the room, not managing it, and watched Bryn move through her people with the ease of someone who had built something real, and he felt the same thing he had felt in the bar on the 54th floor, that first night, before he had any words for it. He had words for it now. It took him another 3 months to fully convince his CFO, his board, and his own considerable stubbornness that the acquisition was clean and correct, and in everybody's interest. It took Bryn's team 6 weeks to complete due diligence to her satisfaction. The signing happened on a Thursday morning in a conference room in the Easton Group's new Dubai office, with lawyers on both sides and exactly the kind of professional neutrality she had insisted on. Afterward, Cole waited for her in the lobby. She came out of the elevator and found him there, hands in his pockets, unhurried, the posture of a man who has made peace with waiting for the right things. "How does it feel?" he asked. She thought about the question seriously. "Like something I worked for." "Good. And you?" "Like I made the right call." "Which one?" He looked at her for a moment. "Both of them." They walked out into the Dubai morning, the sun already white and absolute above the city, the heat rising from the pavement in slow, visible waves. The city moved around them the way cities do, without acknowledgement, without pause, indifferent to the particular, small, enormous drama of two people who had found each other at the intersection of the worst and best versions of themselves and decided to stay. She did not reach for his hand. She did not need to. They walked at the same pace. Not his pace, not hers, but the particular rhythm that two people find when they have stopped trying to lead each other and started simply moving in the same direction. 3 weeks after the signing, Cole flew to Seoul for the first time since he had started to understand what his exile from it had cost him. He told Bryn he was going before he went, which was the kind of thing that seemed small from the outside and was not small at all from the inside. She had looked at him when he told her. How long? 5 days. Maybe 6. And I'm going to have the conversations I've been not having for about 3 years. She had not said, "I'll be here." She had not said, "Call me." She had said, "Good," with a simplicity that meant she understood what he was doing and thought well of it, and that was everything he needed. He had the conversations. They were difficult and long, and in the specific way of family conversations that have been avoided too long, slightly raw at the edges. His mother cried once, briefly, which was his mother's way of expressing things that mattered too much for words. His younger sister, who had inherited all of the directness their parents had carefully routed around, told him he had become someone she didn't recognize, and she was glad he seemed to be becoming someone she did. He came back to Dubai on the 6th day. He came back to Bryn. He did not announce this. He simply appeared, which by now was its own kind of language between them. She opened the door and looked at him and said nothing, which was the best possible response. And they stood in the doorway for a moment, in the particular stillness of two people who have been apart for a week and are registering the return of something. How was it? Necessary. Good necessary or bad necessary? Both. The kind that's both at once. She moved back from the door to let him in. He stepped inside. The apartment smelled like coffee and books, and the particular late afternoon light of a Tuesday, her Tuesday things, all of them, undisturbed and exactly themselves. "You look different," she said. "I feel different." "In a way you can describe." He thought about it. "In a way that has something to do with you." She looked at him for a moment, and then she smiled, the full one, the one she did not give the room but gave him sometimes. And he had been collecting them the way you collect things that are made better by being rare. "Stay for dinner," she said. Yes. It was, in its way, the simplest and most complete thing either of them had said in the whole of the time they had known each other. Not a negotiation, or a condition, or a confession, just two people choosing the same thing at the same time. Stay. Yes. Later that week, he gave her the necklace, not slid across a table, not with conditions attached. He placed it in her hand, on a Tuesday evening on the terrace with the city below, and a glass of wine each, and the easy silence of people who had learned how to occupy the same space. "I never stopped thinking it was yours," he said. She looked at it for a moment in her palm. The same stones, the same weight, the same light throwing itself in a dozen directions. Then she looked at him. "Now it is," she said. She fastened it herself. On her terms. Always. If Bryn and Cole's story moved you, subscribe and come back for the next story. Leave a comment. Did you see it coming? The moment Cole realized who she really was, when exactly did you know she was going to win?